The divorce papers were lying on the kitchen counter before I even realized my marriage had already been buried. My husband hadn't looked me in the eyes when he left them there. Instead, he had kissed our little daughter on the forehead, picked up his briefcase, and walked out into the bright morning sunlight as though he were leaving for another ordinary day. I stood frozen, unable to breathe, staring at the neat stack of papers that carried 15 years of love, sacrifice, and memories reduced to a handful of signatures. What hurt even more than the divorce itself was discovering that the woman who had spent years calling me her daughter had quietly spent those same years tearing my marriage apart, one carefully planned lie at a time. By the time I uncovered the truth, I had already lost my husband, my home, and almost my faith in people. I believed I had failed as a wife. I had no idea that the greatest betrayal had been happening in plain daylight while I was busy trying to hold my family together. If stories about forgiveness, resilience, and finding hope after heartbreak mean something to you, we'd love to have you as part of our community. Your support helps keep these stories alive and reminds others they are never alone. Clara Bennett had never imagined that the happiest day of her life would quietly become the beginning of the greatest battle she would ever fight. She had married Graham after 4 years of building a relationship founded on patience rather than passion, trust rather than promises, and friendship rather than perfection. They had met while volunteering at a community literacy program, where they spent countless afternoons helping children discover the joy of reading. Graham possessed the rare ability to make every person around him feel important, and Clara admired his calm strength more than anything else. Their marriage wasn't glamorous, but it was deeply rooted in mutual respect. They bought a modest home on a peaceful street where maple trees lined both sidewalks, spent weekends renovating old furniture together, and dreamed of raising children who would grow up surrounded by laughter instead of arguments. Life wasn't wealthy or extravagant, but every ordinary morning felt like a blessing. The only shadow hanging over their happiness was Graham's mother, Lorraine. To neighbors and church friends, Lorraine appeared generous, elegant, and endlessly supportive. She baked pies for charity events, remembered everyone's birthdays, and always smiled warmly in public. Clara often wondered if she was imagining things because the woman everyone adored transformed whenever they were alone. Lorraine had a remarkable gift for saying cruel things wrapped inside compliments. She praised Clara's cooking before suggesting Graham had always preferred someone else's recipes. She admired Clara's work ethic while quietly questioning whether a woman should spend so much time focused on her career instead of her husband. Every conversation ended with Clara somehow feeling guilty without understanding why. At first Graham dismissed his mother's comments as harmless habits formed over decades. He encouraged Clara not to overthink every awkward remark, insisting Lorraine struggled to express affection properly. Clara wanted peace more than she wanted to be right, so she convinced herself that love sometimes required overlooking uncomfortable moments. She smiled through family lunches, accepted criticism disguised as advice, and continued inviting Lorraine into their home because she believed kindness eventually softened difficult hearts. Everything began changing after Clara gave birth to their daughter, Hazel. Motherhood filled Clara with overwhelming joy, but it also left her exhausted. The sleepless mornings blended together, laundry piled endlessly, and returning to work required balancing responsibilities she had never anticipated. Lorraine suddenly became more involved than ever before. She insisted on helping with childcare several afternoons each week while Graham was at work. Clara appreciated the assistance because she desperately needed support, yet something always felt unsettling. Lorraine constantly compared Clara to other mothers, questioned every parenting decision, and often ignored Clara's instructions entirely. If Clara requested healthy meals, Lorraine arrived carrying bags filled with sugary snacks. If Clara established nap schedules, Lorraine proudly announced she had kept Hazel awake because grandchildren deserved to have fun. Small disagreements slowly transformed into invisible cracks inside the marriage. Graham always found himself caught between the two women he loved most. Lorraine rarely confronted Clara directly when Graham was present. Instead, she waited until Clara stepped into another room before sighing dramatically or making subtle remarks about how difficult modern marriages had become because wives no longer valued family traditions. Graham rarely challenged those comments because they sounded harmless in isolation. Clara couldn't prove the pattern, and every attempt to explain it made her appear overly sensitive. Months turned into years, and Lorraine's influence quietly expanded. She developed a habit of stopping by without calling, usually during the brightest hours of the afternoon when Graham was working and Clara was trying to manage both her job and parenting responsibilities from home. She wandered through the house pointing out dust on shelves, unfolded laundry she considered improperly folded, and reorganized kitchen cabinets without permission. Whenever Clara politely asked for boundaries, Lorraine smiled sweetly and later told Graham she was only trying to help, while Clara seemed increasingly distant and ungrateful. Clara started noticing strange misunderstandings between herself and Graham. He apologized for conversations that had never happened. He became hurt over comments Clara had never made. Once he quietly asked why she thought his family was embarrassing. Clara stared at him in complete confusion because she had never spoken those words. Graham insisted his mother would never invent such a story. Clara insisted she had never said it. Neither realized someone was carefully planting seeds of doubt. The emotional distance between them grew so gradually neither could identify exactly when it began. They still shared meals and celebrated birthdays, but genuine conversations became shorter. Every disagreement somehow circled back to Lorraine. Clara felt unheard while Graham felt trapped. Love remained, but trust slowly weakened under the weight of endless misunderstandings. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Clara decided to surprise Graham by driving to his office with lunch. She imagined they would eat together in the nearby park before he returned to finish an important project. When she arrived, his assistant looked confused and explained Graham had taken the afternoon off because of a family emergency. Clara's heart pounded. She immediately called him, but his phone went unanswered. Fear raced through her mind as she drove home, wondering whether Hazel had been hurt. Instead, she found Lorraine sitting comfortably in the living room drinking tea while Hazel played happily nearby. Graham wasn't there. Lorraine calmly explained she had called him earlier, claiming Clara had suffered a panic attack and desperately needed him. Graham had rushed home only to discover Clara wasn't there at all. Lorraine casually laughed and described it as a misunderstanding before changing the subject. Clara stood speechless. Hours later, Graham admitted he had indeed left work because of the alarming phone call. Lorraine insisted she had simply misunderstood something Clara mentioned earlier that week. Clara finally confronted Graham that evening with tears streaming down her face. She begged him to recognize the pattern that had been unfolding for years. Graham listened quietly but looked emotionally exhausted. He confessed he no longer knew what to believe because every conflict ended with two completely different versions of reality. Clara realized that was exactly how manipulation survived. It thrived in confusion. Determined to protect her marriage, Clara suggested they attend counseling together. Graham agreed, and for several weeks their relationship began showing signs of healing. Their counselor encouraged honest communication without assumptions. Clara felt hopeful for the first time in months. They laughed together again during weekend breakfasts. Hazel noticed her parents smiling more often. Even Lorraine seemed unusually quiet. But peace never lasted. Lorraine discovered they were attending counseling and interpreted it as a personal attack. She quietly intensified her efforts. She began sending anonymous letters to Graham's office suggesting Clara regretted marrying him. She created fake social media accounts that hinted Clara was growing close to a male coworker. She even manipulated family gatherings by telling relatives that Clara wanted to separate Graham from everyone who loved him. None of the lies were outrageous enough to be immediately unbelievable. They were subtle, believable, and carefully timed. The breaking point arrived during Hazel's 7th birthday celebration. The backyard was filled with colorful balloons, children laughing beneath the afternoon sun, and neighbors enjoying homemade desserts. Clara noticed Graham behaving strangely throughout the party. He smiled politely but avoided looking at her. Near the end of the celebration, he quietly asked whether she had been meeting another man during lunch breaks. Clara nearly dropped the birthday cake she was carrying. She denied everything, but Graham revealed he had received photographs showing her sitting with someone at a cafe. Clara immediately recognized the man. He was an elderly client from her architectural firm who had been discussing renovations for a community center. The photographs had been cropped to remove everyone else from the meeting and carefully framed to suggest intimacy. Graham wanted to believe her, but weeks of manipulation had already weakened his confidence. Doubt had replaced certainty. That evening Clara searched every drawer in the house trying to understand how someone kept gaining access to private details of their lives. Hidden inside a decorative storage box she rarely opened, she found something that made her blood run cold. A small envelope contained photocopies of private notes she had written to Graham years earlier, pages missing from her personal journal, and printed screenshots of innocent messages deliberately edited to change their meaning. Only one person had ever been inside the house often enough to find them. Only one person always knew exactly where everything was kept. Only one person smiled while watching their marriage slowly fall apart. And for the first time, Clara stopped wondering whether Lorraine disliked her. She began wondering just how far Lorraine was willing to go to make sure her son's marriage never survived. Clara sat on the living room floor as the afternoon sunlight poured through the windows, the envelope trembling in her hands. Every page she unfolded felt like another piece of her life being stolen. The familiar handwriting belonged to her, yet parts of her journal had been carefully copied, rearranged, and stripped of the surrounding context until ordinary frustrations looked like hatred. She remembered writing about feeling overwhelmed after Hazel was born, about wondering whether she was failing as a mother, about wishing Graham would notice how exhausted she was. Those private thoughts had never been meant for anyone else's eyes. Now they had become weapons. For the first time in years, every strange misunderstanding, every unexpected argument, every unexplained accusation seemed to connect like pieces of a puzzle she had been trying to solve while someone else kept changing the picture. She wanted to storm into Lorraine's house and demand an explanation, but another thought stopped her. If Lorraine had truly manipulated them for years, confronting her without proof would only give her another opportunity to twist the story. Clara realized she could no longer rely on emotion. She needed facts. Over the following weeks, Clara quietly became more observant than she had ever been. She stopped reacting immediately whenever another misunderstanding appeared. Instead, she wrote everything down. She recorded dates, saved messages, photographed documents, and began noticing patterns that had once seemed like coincidences. Every time Lorraine claimed Clara had said something hurtful, it happened when nobody else was present. Every anonymous message Graham received arrived shortly after Lorraine had visited their home. Every rumor among relatives somehow started with someone who had spoken to Lorraine first. Meanwhile, Graham continued drifting further away. He still loved Clara, but years of carefully planted suspicion had left him emotionally exhausted. He no longer argued as passionately as before because he had reached the dangerous point where disappointment replaced anger. He convinced himself that perhaps two good people simply weren't meant to stay married. Clara watched the man she had loved for 15 years become quieter with each passing day, and the pain was almost unbearable. The divorce papers eventually arrived. Neither of them cried when they signed the preliminary documents. That frightened Clara more than anything else. Their marriage wasn't ending because they hated each other. It was ending because they no longer knew what was true. Lorraine appeared strangely cheerful throughout the process. She offered to help Graham find a smaller home. She volunteered to watch Hazel more often. She even comforted relatives by saying she had tried everything to save the marriage but some relationships simply couldn't be repaired. Everyone praised her kindness while Clara silently carried the weight of being seen as the woman who had failed. After moving into a small townhouse only a few miles away, Clara focused entirely on rebuilding a peaceful life for Hazel. She refused to speak badly about Graham in front of their daughter, no matter how broken she felt. Hazel already carried enough confusion. Clara wanted at least one parent to remain steady. One bright Saturday afternoon, nearly 3 months after the separation, something unexpected happened. Hazel had forgotten her favorite stuffed rabbit at Graham's house, so Clara drove over to collect it before a weekend trip with her parents. Graham wasn't home yet, but Lorraine answered the door because she had been helping organize his kitchen. Lorraine seemed surprised to see Clara. She smiled politely before walking into another room to find the toy. As Clara waited near the entrance, she heard Lorraine's phone ringing on the dining table. The screen lit up repeatedly with messages from someone saved only as L. The first notification disappeared almost instantly. The second remained visible just long enough for Clara to read a single sentence. Did he believe the cafe photos? Her heart stopped. Before Clara could process what she had seen, Lorraine hurried back, quickly picked up the phone, and slipped it into her purse. Her smile remained calm, but for the first time Clara noticed uncertainty in her eyes. That single message changed everything. Clara immediately contacted the counselor who had once worked with her and Graham. Instead of asking for advice, she asked whether Graham would agree to attend one final meeting before the divorce became official. The counselor believed closure could benefit everyone. To Clara's surprise, Graham agreed. During the session, Clara didn't accuse anyone. She simply laid every piece of evidence on the table. The copied journal pages. The altered screenshots. The timeline of anonymous letters. The phone records showing Lorraine had called Graham moments before every major misunderstanding. The dates of mysterious social media accounts appearing immediately after family disagreements. Finally, Clara mentioned the text notification she had accidentally seen. Graham listened without interrupting. His face slowly lost all color. For the first time in years, he wasn't hearing emotional arguments. He was seeing patterns. The counselor quietly asked Graham one question. If none of this involved your mother, would you believe someone else capable of manipulating a marriage this way? Graham lowered his head. After several silent minutes, he whispered that he would. That afternoon, he left the office without saying much. Instead of going home, he drove directly to Lorraine's house. He didn't arrive angry. He arrived searching for the truth. Lorraine welcomed him inside with her usual warmth, but Graham's questions were different this time. He calmly asked about the anonymous letters. She denied knowing anything. He asked about the fake social media accounts. She laughed dismissively. Then he quietly asked whether she had ever entered his home and copied Clara's journal. For a brief second, Lorraine hesitated. It was almost invisible. But Graham noticed. Years earlier he never would have questioned his mother. Now every hesitation felt meaningful. When Graham mentioned the text message Clara had seen, Lorraine finally lost the calm expression she had carefully maintained for years. She insisted Clara was inventing everything. Then she made one fatal mistake. She described the cafe photographs before Graham had even mentioned them. Silence filled the room. Graham had never told her about those pictures. Neither had Clara. There was no reason Lorraine should have known they existed. The realization struck him like a wave. His mother began speaking rapidly, trying to explain herself, but the truth was already standing between them. Eventually, under the weight of contradiction after contradiction, Lorraine admitted far more than Graham ever expected. She confessed she had never believed Clara was good enough for her son. She believed Graham deserved someone wealthier, someone from a more prestigious family, someone she could proudly introduce to friends. At first she intended only to create small disagreements. She thought Graham would eventually lose interest and end the relationship naturally. But every time the marriage survived, she became more determined. What began as criticism slowly became manipulation. Manipulation became deception. Deception became obsession. She convinced herself she was protecting her son, even while destroying the very happiness she claimed to defend. Graham couldn't recognize the woman sitting in front of him. This wasn't the loving mother who had cared for him as a child. This was someone who had allowed pride and control to become more important than her own son's peace. He walked out without raising his voice. For the first time in his life, he left his mother's home without looking back. The following afternoon, Graham came to Clara's townhouse. The divorce papers were still sitting unsigned on the dining table. Neither of them knew how to begin. The silence lasted several minutes before Graham quietly apologized. Not the quick apology people offer to end an argument. The kind that comes from someone realizing they had failed the person who trusted them most. He admitted he should have protected their marriage instead of constantly trying to keep everyone happy. He confessed that every time he ignored Clara's concerns because confronting his mother felt uncomfortable, he unintentionally gave the manipulation more room to grow. Clara listened with tears filling her eyes. She also admitted she had made mistakes. She had allowed fear and frustration to replace open communication. She sometimes expected Graham to simply know what she was feeling instead of telling him honestly. Neither blamed the other for everything. Both accepted responsibility for the places where they had become vulnerable. Healing didn't happen that afternoon. It began. Over the next several months they attended counseling again, not because they were broken beyond repair, but because they refused to repeat the same mistakes. Trust returned slowly. Some days felt hopeful. Others felt painfully uncertain. But every difficult conversation ended with honesty instead of assumptions. Eventually, they withdrew the divorce filing. It wasn't a dramatic celebration. It was a quiet decision made by two people who realized their marriage had always been worth fighting for, as long as they fought beside each other instead of against each other. Graham established firm boundaries with Lorraine. He told her that forgiveness could only exist alongside accountability. Until she accepted responsibility and respected their family, she would not be involved in their daily lives. For months Lorraine refused. She blamed Clara. She blamed circumstances. She blamed misunderstandings. But loneliness has a way of forcing difficult reflection. Without constant access to her son and granddaughter, she finally confronted the emptiness created by her own choices. Nearly a year later, Lorraine requested one final meeting. It took place in a quiet public garden on a warm afternoon. She looked older than Clara remembered. Not because of age alone, but because regret had settled into her face. There were no excuses left. She admitted that jealousy had slowly taken control of her heart. Watching Graham build a family independent of her had made her feel abandoned, and instead of embracing Clara as another daughter, she treated her as a rival. By the time she realized what she had become, she had already destroyed the people she loved most. Clara didn't immediately forgive her. Forgiveness wasn't a gift someone earned in a single conversation. It was a journey. But Clara chose not to carry hatred anymore. She accepted the apology, while making it clear that trust would need to be rebuilt through consistent actions over time. That was enough. Years later, their home looked different from the one where everything had fallen apart. The walls had been repainted. New family photographs covered the hallway. Hazel had grown into a confident teenager who often reminded her parents to laugh whenever life became too serious. One sunny afternoon she asked them what had saved their marriage. Graham smiled gently before answering that love alone wasn't enough. Trust had to be protected. Boundaries had to be respected. And silence could become dangerous when good people ignored uncomfortable truths. Clara looked around the home they had nearly lost and realized the greatest victory wasn't proving Lorraine wrong. It was refusing to let bitterness define the rest of their lives. The pain they had endured became the foundation for a stronger family, one built on honesty instead of appearances and courage instead of fear. Before this story ends, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever seen someone try to control a relationship through manipulation? And what lesson do you think matters most when it comes to protecting a marriage? Share your thoughts in the comments because your experience might encourage someone who needs hope today. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Remember that the strongest families are not the ones that never face hardship. They are the ones who choose truth over pride, forgiveness over resentment, and love over the lies that try to divide them. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones we never expected, but even after the deepest betrayal, hope can still find its way back into the light.